Hi everyone, my name is Andy Plater. I'm a commercial pilot and a flight instructor, and I operate out of the Owen Sound Billy Bishop Regional Airport. Our company, Owen Sound Flight Services, we operate out of the airport and we do various things. We do charter flights, we take people places, point-to-point flights. We also do sightseeing flights where we show people our beautiful region from above. And we also do flight training, teaching people, the pilots of tomorrow, that either they want to fly big stuff like this or they just want to become private pilots and fly around the local area. This is a bit of an open letter, and an open letter with various recipients. One is the constituents, the taxpayers of Owen Sound and Grey Bruce region in general. It's also an open letter to the mayor, deputy mayor, and councillors of the city of Owen Sound, and also to our provincial and federal levels of government, our provincial MPP Bill Walker and Alex Ruff, our federal MP. The reason why I'm making this video is we came across this recommendation from the city manager, Tim Simmonds. This is for this council meeting on July 19th, this Monday. And it's suggesting that the city of Owen Sound sell the Owen Sound Billy Bishop Regional Airport. I have a bit of a unique perspective on this, and I want to make sure that it's heard and that the flying community is heard on what is happening here. My perspective, who am I to talk about this? I've been flying for about 11 years and teaching for most of that. And for me, out of anyone that operates or uses the Owen Sound Billy Bishop Airport, I would say I spend the most time on the property and seeing what's going on and what airplanes are coming and going and the real kind of user base of the airport. So oftentimes, even when the airport management staff aren't there, maybe we're still there, moving airplanes around and that kind of thing, and seeing the goings on. So that's where I'm coming from to talk on this topic. So I have some questions for you. I have some questions for each of the recipients of this video. The first questions, I want to talk to the citizens of the area, taxpayers in Owen Sound and the surrounding areas. A couple questions for you. First, do you think the airport is an asset or a liability? This is a very important question, and I think a lot of people put themselves in this us versus them camp, and they pick a side. But I want to talk about this. Well, do you think is the airport an asset or a liability, and specifically why? Why is it an asset? Why is it a liability? And in discussing this, what I find is a lot of the time on our social media we'll get into discussions and people will be talking about the airport. And the reason I bring this up is I think there's a lot of people that don't know everything that happens at the airport. And sometimes what we see on like our social medias or Facebook page and that sort of thing is that when we say, well, when medevac flights come into the airport, for example, a lot of people will jump in the comments, they'll leave a comment and they'll say, medevac flights don't leave out of the Owen Sound Airport. So that's just an example of, do you know what types of aircraft actually land at the Owen Sound Airport? You might be surprised. There's quite a few different aircraft that do land here. And another question for the constituents is, if the airport does close, what will you lose? What will you gain for the airport closing? Financially, indirectly, what will you gain? What will you lose if the airport does close? So let's start talking about this a little bit. I mentioned social media. About a year ago, our company started a little bit of a campaign on social media. And the idea of the campaign was really just to raise awareness about what happens at the airport. And let me just pull up our Facebook page here. Starting about spring last year, on our Facebook page, we really just started a campaign, and really all it was to just post about what happens at the airport, post about different airplanes that are coming and going, post about medevac flights that are happening out of the airport. medevac flights being patient transfers. A helicopter or a fixed wing airplane shows up at the airport, an ambulance shows up right behind them. They load up a patient and they leave. Sometimes these medevac flights are carrying 4 or 5 specialists into the airport into the community, into the city of Owen Sound. They offload, they drive an ambulance into town, and then they come back with a patient. Are you aware of all these things that happen at the airport? What we found is that when we started doing this campaign here, where we started just posting about things we're seeing, posting about aircraft and the activity that's happening at the airport, what started happening surprised us, actually. We started getting calls. We started getting calls from people looking for interviews to interview us about the goings-ons at the airport. And when we asked why interviewing us about the airport, and the response we got was, well, there's just so much going on. There's so much activity. We see it all over the social media. When we started posting all these, there wasn't any more activity than normal. This was just normal goings-ons at the airport. And we just started posting it. We wanted to make sure that people were aware of all the things that were going on at the airport. And people were noticing. They saw all the activity and they're like, wow, there's a lot going on out here. Here's a great example of what the OPP does. Sometimes they come into the airport and they'll pick up some gas, and then they'll go on a search and rescue mission into the local community, looking for people lost in the bush or stuck in the water somewhere, drowning, all kinds of scenarios where the OPP steps up with the helicopter and they're coming out and looking for missing persons and that kind of thing. The C-130 Hercules, it's a big airplane and it can land here in Owen Sound. Think of all the capability that gives us as a community. These guys, the men and women with the military, they come to Owen Sound and they train here. They're training in our local waters, our local land, to do search and rescue missions, to do potential emergency response missions. Are you aware that Owen Sound has that kind of capability? There's more. There's more airplanes that come in here. Wasaya comes in here once in a while. Again, a lot of it's part of military activity, carrying passengers and that kind of thing. Ministry of Natural Resources comes in here. Sometimes they're doing environmental studies. Something a little faster, like a jet, can come in here. There's a lot that can make it in to the Owen Sound Airport. The snowbirds haven't been around for a while, but back in the day they were. They came in here a couple times. There's a lot of orange medevac flights coming in and out of here all the time. So do you know about these things? Do you know about all the things that happen at the airport? This is a brief summary. I only gave myself a few minutes to talk about this, but let's have the discussion. Jump in the comments. Let's talk about it. Come on out to the airport. Let's go walk the grounds. We'll see what happens at the airport. And again, with the last question here, what do you lose or gain if you lose the airport? One thing I think you would lose is a lot of these services. A lot of people with the medevac, specifically when we talk about medevac, they say, well, they land at the hospital. That's true, but sometimes they can't. Just the other day, we posted on our Facebook page this picture. Let me pull it up here. This is a picture of a helicopter on approach to land in Owen Sound. The visibility is pretty bad. It's only a few miles of visibility. You can just barely see the helicopter poking out of the clouds here on their approach into Owen Sound. If I scroll to the next picture, it's a little more clear there. This is a case where if Owen Sound Airport didn't exist and there was just the hospital as it is now, this medevac flight would not have been able to come here. It relied on an instrument procedure that's built around the Owen Sound Airport in order to break through the clouds and land. They landed, they picked up some gas, the ambulance came out to the airport. It was more efficient and probably safer for them to come out to the airport to pick up the patient there. And then they continued on. I'm not sure if this one went to London or if they went to Toronto or what, but they moved to a bigger hospital, I'm sure. So these are the sorts of things that I think we may lose if the airport closes. I would say not, well, it's clear that not all medevac flights come into the airport. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I would say almost every day there's a medevac flight coming into the Owen Sound community, maybe once a week or so. One of them comes through the airport as required for their mission, either because they need fuel, because they got diverted for some reason, or fixed wing aircraft that needs a really fast flight to London, that kind of thing. What do you gain from the airport closing? Well, a few dollars a year. It does cost every taxpayer in Owen Sound a few dollars per year for the airport to operate. There is the capital costs, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, of, maybe the runway needs repaved in the future, but if you amortize that, if you split that up over the years that a runway will be in service for, it's again maybe another few dollars a year to pay for repaving the runway. Is that worth it? Is that worth it that one of your friends and family members may be able to get a critical medical flight in poor weather, for example? So those are my questions. Leave your thoughts in the comments and call us up. Our company number's all over the Facebook page, everywhere, and let's have a chat about it. Come on out. If we just set up a time, I'll take anyone to come walk the runway with me. Let's take a look at what the facilities look like here and what it can do for you. My questions to the mayor, hang on, let me get a better background here. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and City Council of Owen Sound. One question for you guys is, what is the true economic impact of the Owen Sound Billy Bishop Airport? This is something that has been brought up in the recent past. And one of the things that gets mentioned is it gets a little bit deflected, and maybe the economic impact, the total benefit to the community might be quite high, but we need to pay for the airport. We need direct impact, not this indirect impact. So let's talk about that. Why do we need the facility to pay for itself, or come close to paying for itself? And what is the serviceability of the asphalt on the apron? How soon or on the runway and the other asphalt around the airport? How soon do we have to repave the runway? And lastly, how does the Billy Bishop Airport affect the emergency management plan of Owen Sound and Grey Bruce in general? So coming back to the economic impact, let me pull up some new slides here. So when we look at economic impact, and we look at what other airports have done, this is a very frequent site. It's an economic impact study. And this is done by an independent third party to look at the airport and look at not just the airport grounds itself, but the benefits to the community in general, and look at how many people come in and eat at the restaurants and stay at the hotels and pay for the taxis. How many people does the airport directly employ? How many medevac services are benefiting the community? These sorts of things can all get lumped into this economic impact study, and it's done by an independent third party, someone that has no skin in the game, looking at all these details. This document I won't go through in a lot of detail. It's available online. This was one done for the St. Thomas Airport a little while ago, 2007. But at that time, they figured that the St. Thomas Airport had a gross revenue of $12 million. That's quite a lot when we're talking about in the $200,000 range for the Owen Sound Airport to operate. Halliburton Stanhope. This one is, again, a little while ago, but at that time, they figured $4 million, a little bit less, but we're still talking in the millions in terms of revenues to the community. Tilsonburg, 2006, $1.5 million, again, less, but revenue's coming into the community. This is revenue the community would have not had prior. So it's in a way something that can offset what the community feels in terms of taxes. If you're bringing in more revenue, you can have more tax revenue as well. So this is something that it'd be interesting to know the number, right? I'm not a city guy. I don't have no city management experience, obviously. And that's okay. But I think it would be interesting for us to know the number. We haven't done an economic impact study, at least for many, many years. It would be a good idea for us to know, what is that number? What is the loss to the community revenue in order for us to lose the airport? We have a wide range here from a couple $1 million up to $12 million. I've seen these numbers in some of these studies even higher than that. These are small airports too. This is St. Thomas, Halliburton, and Tilsonburg. This is not your Kitchener or Toronto Island or Pearson. These are small airports like ours. So it'd be interesting to know the number. So that's my question to you. What is the economic impact if we lose the airport? And that ties into, why would the facility need to pay for itself? This is always a tough question, I'm sure, with various different assets to the community. You've got various services that do pay for themselves or offset their costs. You know, think about water utilities, you directly get money for that sort of thing. Parking, you directly get money for the parking. But what about roadworks? They don't pay for themselves. The bridge doesn't pay for themselves. A lot of great assets to the community, like parks, don't directly pay for themselves. These are great assets that the community has, and there's decisions to be made. We can talk about how much the airport is costing, but we also have to weigh that against, is this an asset that needs to pay for itself? Think about emergency services. Nobody enters the community through the fire hall doors, but the fire hall, I'm sure, costs a good amount of money, and it's an amazing asset to the community. We have local fire hall service to Owen Sound. So that's a question. Why must the facility pay for itself? If it must, or if it must pay more for itself than it is, why is that? The current serviceability of the asphalt. One of the things in the city manager's report is that he feels the asphalt at Owen Sound Billy Bishop needs to be repaved in 2 to 5 years. When we dig into the why for that, what Tim is citing here is a 2008 study that said within 8 to 14 years, the asphalt's going to be aging, maybe replace it by 2022. This study, though, is 13 years old. It's a very old study. If you put a new roof on your house, or if you bought a house and you had a home inspection done, say, yeah, the roof fits, it'll be good for a good 13, 14 years. Would you go that 14 years and then just replace the roof? I don't think you would. You'd have another contractor to come out and they'd inspect it. They'd take a look. They'd see what it looks like. A question I have about this is, in preparing this report, did anybody go and take a look at the runway, walk along the runway and see what condition it's in? I did, and I took a look at the runway. This section in this video clip that we're seeing right here is, in my opinion, the most damaged part of the whole runway, right here. What I see when I look here is I see a fairly sizable crack down the runway, and where it's kind of sunken in a little bit. We'll look a little bit closer at that in a minute. But if we look at other parts of the runway, let me skip ahead a little bit. Here's another crack in the runway. This one I think is just a seam that goes down the whole length of the runway. And here you can see where it's been sealed. It's been sealed with tar, and that has prevented it from re-cracking and getting worse. Let me kind of let this play out a little bit. I'll just kind of walk around here a little bit. There's many cracks on the runway, and here's some other ones here on the right. Here's another crack on the runway, and it's been sealed with tar. This one's not a seam, it's actually a crack that's formed, and no crack has reformed on the runway. This crack was sealed a few years ago. I don't know exactly how long, but I think it was 3 or 4 years ago. This crack was sealed on the runway. And this maintenance worked. This maintenance worked to prevent the crack from reforming, and it kept the neighboring asphalt from crumbling, and it kept it in great shape. Let me go back to that most damaged part of the runway. What I see here when I look at this is there's a bit of a divot, and it comes down roughly kind of between my first and second knuckle if I stick my fingers in the runway there. So it's damaged, and it needs some look at it. When I ask myself why did this crack form, well, I think it's because it was never resealed. You can see where there's asphalt on there where it had been sealed, and then a few years went by and the crack reformed and it started to sink down, and it never resealed. And if you start getting water in the cracks, that's going to accelerate that degradation very quickly. So a question here is, why wasn't the crack resealed? Like I say, I believe that this is the worst damaged part of the runway. It's pretty close to the middle of the runway. Instead of repaving the whole runway, could we just cut out damaged sections like this and repave those sections? I think that would cost a lot less than the $1.4 million. I'm not an asphalt guy. I'm not an engineer for airports, but I do know there's companies nearby. There's even a company that is one of the owners lives in Owen Sound that can do this kind of engineering work, and they can look at this. I was chatting with them the other day, just kind of getting some rough idea. It sounds like for them to come out and just take a look at things, it's probably less than $5,000. They didn't give me an exact quote, but that's probably what it would be. Isn't it worth $5,000 for us to have someone that is an engineer that builds these runways professionally come out, take a look, and see what they think? Get an estimate from them on how long it's going to last. When I look at this runway here and I look beside this damaged section, what I see is on both ends of the runway going in either direction, there's thousands of feet of beautiful asphalt with very little cracking. The cracks that I do see, any new cracks that I see, typically they haven't been sealed. And I think it's just maintenance. Maintenance will protect the runway. I believe this runway is in excellent condition. I've seen a lot of runways, and I've seen a lot of runways that I've landed on that were in worse shape than Owen Sound's runway. Look at all the asphalt here. It's going for probably 1,500, 2,000 feet without any major cracking until it gets kind of the crest of the hill up there. So what's wrong with the runway? Why does it need to be replaced? One thing to bear in mind is runways last way, way longer than roads do. And one of the main reasons for that is they get less traffic and they don't get salted in the winter. Salt can do a whole lot of damage to runways. The runways don't get salted because it would corrode the airplanes, and that really helps extend the life as well. So bear that in mind when we're considering the lifetime of the runway. I believe maintenance can keep the runway going, I would guess, in the 10-year range or more. It just needs regular maintenance. We've kind of been talking about this maybe for about a year. This has come up a few times, and since then, these little cracks haven't been looked at. They haven't been resealed, even though we've been talking about, yeah, this is really important. Let's seal these cracks on the runway. Let's do maintenance. Keep it going. Let's do it. Let's do the maintenance. Let's keep up with the maintenance. And I think you'll see this runway will last another 10 years. So emergency management, I was talking about how the Billy Bishop Airport can land some really big airplanes. This is the C-130 Hercules, operated by the Canadian military. They really like to land here because they like to condition our runways in, and we have very close proximity to the Meaford base, and they do a lot of operations out of the base there. There's also military helicopter traffic that come in as well. Quite recently we had 2 Chinook helicopters coming in the middle of the night. I don't have the picture handy, but there's a lot of military activity that happens here as well. When we're thinking about emergencies, the big thing on everyone's mind in the last year or two is COVID. COVID has really uprooted everyone in all communities. and our lives have completely changed. I wonder, what's the next emergency? Maybe it's not going to be a virus. Maybe it's going to be a major natural disaster like flooding or fires. These guys are trained to respond in cases like that. Imagine how much personnel, help that can come into the community in a Hercules. Imagine how many people can be evacuated out of a community in a Hercules. We can fit 2 or 3 of these things on the ramp in Owen Sound, and we can move a lot of cargo, a lot of people, using our Owen Sound Airport. Think about, smaller scale stuff too. The Owen Sound Hospital. Google Maps reports it's an 8-minute drive from the Owen Sound Airport. Probably more like 4 or 5 minutes with the lights on, but we're in that kind of ballpark. It's all highway there. If you need to evacuate an individual, or if you need to evacuate a lot of people to get to help, the airport is a great asset to our community. It's very, very close. The next closest airport would be Wyerton. Wyerton's about 35 minutes drive away, maybe 25 or so with the lights on. It's a much further distance, and that doesn't sound like much, but if you got 2 or 3 patients to evacuate, and they each need their own ambulance, and they each need their own medical crew to be on board to do it, there's a lot of more logistics that has to go in to moving patients through Wyerton. A lot of the time, we're transporting, or the Owen Sound Airport rather, is transporting patients from the Owen Sound Airport to somewhere like London with the Pilatus PC-12 fixed wing airplane. That airplane can get to London in a little less than 20 minutes total. So from Owen Sound to the airport, load the patient, maybe that whole process takes 10 or 12 minutes. In just over half an hour, you're actually in London. That's the amount of time it takes to get to Wyerton Airport by ambulance. So it's important to put these all into perspective. Our services will definitely go down for emergency use if the Owen Sound Airport's not here. I think that's about all the questions I have for our local representation. Thank you for all that you guys are doing for our community. To provincial and federal guys, I'm kind of hinting at a little bit these emergency services. My question to you is, how will they be affected? Owen Sound Airport is no more. What's going to be the effect on emergency services? And then also, what is that direct financial impact? Emergency services are lost, both from military side of things and provincial air ambulance, OPP. What's that financial impact look like? You can't get fuel in Owen Sound anymore. You can't do fixed wing flights to evacuate people or bring cargo in. Another one that's not kind of on the list here is for the military guys. The military guys are doing training in our area all the time. Is that training going to degrade if the C-130 can't land in Owen Sound? Very frequently they'll do operations out of here. They're going to pick up their drops that they drop out in the lake. They transport them here. They drop them onto the runway here. It's giving them a lot of great training in our area specifically. Those pilots and those SARTECs coming out of the Hercules, they are going to know this area like the back of their hand. But if they can't land here, maybe they don't train on this scale. Maybe they go a little bit further away in the wider Ontario area. Is that training going to degrade in our area, in our region, because they don't have that extremely local representation of the Meaford base being assisted by the Owen Sound Airport? So for the medevac and OPP operations, I kind of talked a little bit about the travel times here, but another thing to think about is the loss of the PC-12, and it's not just the travel time and patient outcomes we're thinking of. The Pilatus PC-12 is the aircraft that primarily lands in Owen Sound. The PC-12 is a real workhorse of an airplane. You can see here, generally, they're going to fly over 500 kilometers an hour. And one thing to just bear in mind is, yes, we can get medevac services to the hospital. That's true. We can have the helicopter land at the hospital. The helicopter lands at the hospital is the Augusta 139. The Augusta 139 costs a lot more. It costs a lot more to operate than the PC-12. It flies pretty fast, maybe not quite as fast, but it's maybe a little bit similar there. But it costs a lot per mile. My guess, and I don't operate these aircraft, I don't know, but my guess is you're talking probably 4 or 5 times more to operate one of these than to operate a PC-12. So when you're weighing in the financial impact, if you don't have any PC-12 flights coming in, how's that weigh in? If these guys get diverted and now they need to pick up some gas, they do that quite frequently, by the way. Maybe they were originally coming up to Owen Sound, they were going to pick up someone here, and then they get diverted, and that patient they were picking up is no longer the priority. Maybe there's someone on the roadside. They need to get off that roadside. They may divert. They'll divert to that patient on the roadside, pick them up, drop them off at the hospital. Very frequently when they do that, the next place they come is here to the Owen Sound Airport. The reason being is because they're going to need gas. They just got diverted. They need gas. And so frequently what happens is they'll stop at the Owen Sound Hospital. They'll come over to the Owen Sound Airport. They'll pick up gas. And then while they're picking up gas, spending a little bit of time waiting on the ground, the ambulance comes out to the airport and loads up at the airport. We've seen this quite often. So there will be 2 patient transfers that happen. How many of those things are happening here in Owen Sound? And how is that going to be affected? We can't get gas here anymore. How many instrument condition flights happen where they can't land at the hospital without the instrument approach here in Owen Sound? There's many towers around the city of Owen Sound, so it's not really safe for them to descend through the clouds if the clouds are too low, but it is safe for them to do it typically here at the airport. So these are things we want to consider. What's going to be the losses on the air ambulance side? On the military side, I already kind of talked about potential training losses and that kind of thing. Kind of an interesting factoid for you to think about is when the military comes in, we always kind of laughed at this over the years. The fuel pump at the airport only pumps so fast. It's got a limited, gallons per minute or whatever. So when the Hercules comes in and they land at the Owen Sound Airport, what used to happen is we had a restaurant in the terminal building there. Excuse me. And 15 men and women would hop out of the back of the C-130 and they'd all go for lunch. And while they're going for lunch, the airport operator would come out, they'd start refueling the airplane. Guys who go for lunch, they're there for for an hour and a half. They're there getting lunch, filling up the pilots as the airplane's filling up. The limiting factor on how much gas they took was how quickly they could pump it, because there's so much gas carrying capability, and I don't want to sound silly because I'll definitely mess up the numbers, but this thing carries a lot of gas. I'm pretty sure in the hundreds of thousands of liters range, but I don't know that for sure, don't quote me. It takes a lot of gas, jet fuel. And so their limiting factor was when they were done lunch, they hopped in and went. Whatever gas they got, because they're never going to fill the tanks. They don't want to wait that long. This is the kind of thing that happens quite often at the airport. Less so the getting gas part. The fact the restaurant's not there anymore is a big loss in terms of these guys waiting around to get gas. So having an airport here that has an extra restaurant facility, it's really helping when they're doing operations at the military base. Coming back to my questions on the provincial and feds, how much of an impact does that make? Having this local base that these guys training here in the Meaford training facility, that impact to the military operations. So these are some of my concerns and some of my questions. I've spent about 35 minutes of your time, so if you stuck around this long, thank you very much for your time. I'm happy to have you listen to me and hear what I have to say. We're concerned about the airport, and one of the reasons why we're concerned is because frequently what happens is if these things go, they might be gone forever. I think the concern coming from the city is it's costing a lot of money, and I think that's definitely true. And one of the things that the mayor, Ian Boddy, said at a recent meeting was these things used to be federally and provincially funded, and they were. When this airport was put in, there was a lot of federal grants and provincial grants to keep these things going. Those grants have kind of dried up, and this is the case across the country. These municipalities are stuck with the bill to try and keep this vital infrastructure running. It is infrastructure. It's part of running the province and the country. So can we get more money coming down from the higher levels of government? Can we get more of the surrounding communities to chip in? My understanding is the tax money from the land here in Owen Sound goes to Meaford. There was some talks a while ago about, is there any other deals that can be negotiated there? Meaford's also getting a benefit. Can we get a tax break on the lands here in Meaford? These are the sorts of things that I wonder about. Are these revenue streams that can help? When we talk about this landing fee, there's a lot of discussion. It's really, I think the narrative has been pushed into this pilots versus taxpayers and the city. And I don't think that way at all. I think the pilots are highlighting that they don't have the finances to support a $200,000 piece of infrastructure. This is really a team effort. We need to all come together to support the infrastructure. I think just putting a fee in for the pilots, it's not going to raise the revenue that we want. The $35, I think we're getting a lot of pushback there, not because pilots are being charged, but I think it's just the method. If you put in a toll road on the new bridge that went into town, that would be just completely silly. Nobody would suggest that. That's how pilots feel about this landing fee. And whether that's right or wrong doesn't change the fact that's how that fee is interpreted. There's other ways to make money from leases, from from all the other. Well, actually, Tim Simmonds did a good job to mention a lot of the ways that revenue can be generated at an airport. He's mentioning leases. He's mentioning fuel sales. One thing that I don't know that's in there is tie-down fees. So when we're talking about people pay to park their car, well, people pay to park their airplane as well. If someone's going to tie down outside overnight, an itinerant pilot that's coming in, going to stay overnight and then leave, they would pay a tie-down fee. I think too, the fees haven't been communicated well across all levels of the municipality. Like I say, I spent a lot of time at the airport. There's been landing fees for large commercial aircraft for a number of years now. I walk in and out of the terminal building. There's a sign on the terminal building door. I think 2.5 years ago, it went to $100 for large commercial aircraft. Then it went up to $150. Different levels of our municipality weren't aware of that. So how can we improve that communication and the tracking of the revenue? I think that revenue maybe got lost. Where did that go? So these are the sorts of questions to ask, and I don't see it as an us versus them. I think what we have here is a vital piece of infrastructure we need to protect, and we need to look at this needs to be protected. How do we do that? And this letter really, I think, starts with let's shut it down, and then it goes on to here's all the ways we can shut it down. So that's my thoughts on it. Thanks again for listening to what I have to say, and I hope that we can continue the discussion. I don't at all think that here's my opinion and that's the end of the story. Let's talk about it. Call us up. Our phone number, 519-372-1259. Let's have a chat. Call me personally. My name's Andy. Dave is the owner of the company. He's happy to talk to you too. Let's go tour the airport grounds. Anyone that's receiving this video, let's go on a bit of a tour. Let's see what it's all about. Take a look at the airplanes that are out on the day at least, and take a look at the facilities that we have here in Owen Sound. I think it's a really great asset, and I think if the community really understood what it does for them, I think they'd be in support of it.